Hey guys, thanks for joining today. My name's Eric Mirandit. I'm responsible for customer operations here at Tulip. And I'm excited today to talk with you and a couple of our panelists about cultivating citizen developers at scale. And what are the advantages of having a connected worker within your operations. So without further ado, I want to introduce our two panelists for today, Audra Kirkland and Dave Steele. So Audra Kirkland is the Director of Digital Manufacturing at Terex and has over 21 years of experience in continuous improvement and digital enablement for manufacturing, supply chain, lean, and services operations. She spent over half of her career developing and implementing applications for factory team members. Dave is the Production Manager at Rich Brilliant Willing and is responsible for on-time fulfillment of orders and integration of new technologies such as Tulip onto the shop floor. He has 8 years of production experience. He started his career making ice cream, then later transitioned into manufacturing LED light fixtures before eventually becoming the RBW change management leader. He's passionate about the positive impact business can have on its employees, its customers, suppliers, communities, and the environment. Dave also has a Bachelor's of Arts from Pratt Institute. So welcome, Audra. Welcome, Dave.
Hey.
Thank you for having
me.
Yeah, our pleasure. So I think, before we get into the questions today, we've got a lot of good discussion points here, but I wanted to hand it off to each of you guys just to give a quick introduction about when did you adopt Tulip? How are you using this in your operations today? And what are the types of projects you're taking on? So, Audra, maybe we'll kick it off with you.
So I joined Terex in the Aero work platforms in October of 2019, and the team was actually going through an analysis of all of the MES providers, basically looking for how to get started on the MES journey and on the digital journey in manufacturing. When I joined, we started kind of looking at the way that manufacturing worked and the lean aspects of our operations, and a lot of the traditional MES products just didn't kind of line up with what we were trying to do at the outset. So we looked at Tulip, we added it to kind of the groupings, and we formally kicked off in March of the next year.
Yeah. And Dave, just so the audience today realizes, we have a couple of really interesting perspectives here. So, Terex, rather large company, and Audra comes to us from the IT, with an IT background, RBW, and much smaller company, and Dave comes to us from the operations side. So we have kind of big company, smaller company, IT versus operations. Again, I think a couple of pretty interesting perspectives when we're talking about this topic today. So Dave, do you want to give us a quick overview of, when did you first adopt Tulip and what are the types of operations that you're taking on with it today?
Sure. We started using Tulip maybe 2 or 3 years ago. Before we started using Tulip, we still use an ERP called NetSuite, and that helps us facilitate most of our orders. But we found that there was a disconnect on the shop floor and what information was needed to produce orders accurately beyond just the ERP. And so I don't know who found each other, but it was a pretty good match. And we kind of went with the angle of using Tulip to facilitate work orders, to build instructions to the shop floor. But as we've kind of grown with Tulip, we use it to track data, use that data to inform our decision making. We've also moved forward and tried to connect it to our CAD software Onshape. And so that's a project that we're working on right now to actually get the engineering documentation smoother and easier to the shop floor. So that's it's been a big tool and a big project for us.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's get into the discussion topics that we have lined up for today. We're basically going to be grouping this conversation today around 3 core sections. First, why is it worth empowering a citizen developer? Why doesn't, Audra build every application that the business would need for every operator, and why isn't this controlled and administered strictly top-down, hierarchically administered? Like, why is it worth having this notion of a citizen developer? And then next, what does it mean to actually implement citizen development? So, I mean, we're getting into like, why is this important? And then like, as you're going about this, what types of programs, what types of infrastructure, what types of safeguards do you need to have in place in order for this to be successful? And then finally, how do you encourage, so we're basically giving the power to the people, democratizing a lot of the tools that have traditionally been restricted to, an ID department or a few developers. Now, once you give people this tool, how do you encourage them to embrace these new tools and to, use a Tulip to solve these types of problems? And there's lots of things that I think we've seen work, within Terex's operation, certainly within RBW's operation, to help get people ramped up, to help upskill folks, foster creative hackathons, things like this. So this is going to be kind of the three primary focuses of the conversation today. And I think, the first question I want to kick off with is, I'd like to hear a little bit about, what kinds of challenges did you encounter previously when you try to improve your operations with technology? And I think a little bit of context here, and as you heard in the last talk from Natan, our CEO, there's this there's this transition that's happening now, from sort of a centrally controlled, very specific skills for software development that only developers can do, to this ability to build applications through no-code tools. And so, really what we're referring to with this first question is, kind of in this previous era, that you mentioned, Audra, with like the MES systems and how you were using this, what are some of the challenges you encountered, in that type of environment when you tried to roll out these systems?
Well, for me, it was really one of the main purposes for looking elsewhere was the lean and agile methodologies in a factory are not really geared towards traditional MES solutions. They're very heavy, and they take a lot of kind of re-educating your manufacturing teams on the language of an MES. So our factory teams didn't really have that language because they had never had digital tools that were prolific in the factories. So because they had never gone through the traditional language transitions, most of the terminology used on the factory floor was really geared towards lean and agile, which is kind of different from talking about routes and operations, which is stuff that you have to know and understand to do a traditional MES. So a lot of it was really that. There was no way for me to take and educate all of our factories on a totally different language, and it wasn't really going to be productive for us because the way that they work is very single piece flow, very lean. So it just wasn't a good fit with traditional heavy MES platforms.
You bring up a really interesting point. You're mentioning, you said there's the systems and the routings and the business process that has to be mapped, and a data model behind this business process that once it's established is very hard to change. But then you're also saying there's this other paradigm that exists on the shop floor, which is one of lean, right? Which is focused in continuous improvement and one piece flow and, solve problems in the moment. But there's like, one is fundamentally rigid and inflexible and has to be in many ways. The other is, you need to respond to a changing environment, and how you do that most efficiently. And there is like this cultural tension between these two systems. Dave, and I want to come back to this. I think this is sort of a key theme for, why does Tulip exist as a product? But Dave, you said something interesting, and I wanted to follow up on it. You basically said you have your ERP, all of the things that Audra just described are true of your ERP, and yet you also have Tulip, which is kind of this bridge to this other world, which is again sort of centered in lean. So I guess the same question to you. You implemented an ERP, and a good ERP at that. I mean, we partner with NetSuite. We do a lot of work with them. But what was the challenge? Like why was it ERP alone not enough for your operations?
I think it's pretty, or I guess I started off on the shop floor at RBW, and I think what I found when people, when there's a motion to integrate a solution, it's actually not from the people who are from the shop floor, or they don't really understand the scope of the problem. And so I think giving Tulip, which is, I think the easier accessibility to the software, kind of enables or gives agency to the people on the floor to provide solutions. And personally at RBW, we're kind of a job shop mostly. We do a very high mix, low quantity kind of production. So we don't always have these streamlined solutions. And sometimes we really depend on the operators to give us their feedback. And so I think that kind of malleability or flexibility is what Tulip was able to provide at kind of a closer region to the shop floor, whereas the ERP is very kind of higher level, focused on material consumption and minutes. But that's where I'd suggest was kind of like the shortcoming was that the kind of a disconnect between the problem solvers and the people who are actually experiencing the problem.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess so, sort of a follow-up question, and I want to get into this. We're going to get into the how, and we're going to get into the programs here in a moment. But I want to, before we do that, I want to understand from each of your perspectives a little bit more deeply, what are the disparate needs? You have, you on the one hand, you have to be able to control your business processes. You have to be able to control orders and inventories but on the other hand, the shop floor has and so these are the needs oftentimes of IT in providing a safe environment to do these things. But on the other hand, you also have operations that needs to be super flexible and dynamic and able to respond in real time. And I'd be curious to hear from your perspective, what are the top needs of the operations teams in these types of digital systems, and how do those differ from the needs of the IT departments within sort of the big company? Audrey, we can start with you, and then talk about the smaller company, and we'll go to you, Dave.
So since we're really cross-site, and we're trying to do things very similarly across the different factories, I control what I call the data model, the back-end data model of the apps that we build that are going to be globally consumed. But we don't hinder the ability for sites to do their own builds if they have something that they want to kind of put in place before we get to that particular global build. We don't hinder them in any way. It's build what you want, just understand that if we come with a global solution, it will supersede what you have, and you'll have to kind of come along with us. So it's been a very flexible approach, and the teams have been really willing to accept it so far. And like I said, we just started at the, kind of in March of last year. So we're probably pretty young in our journey, but we've also moved pretty quickly, I would say. We have multiple instances. Every site kind of has citizen developers. So it's a blended approach.
Yeah, and you guys are moving very quickly. So you may be early in the journey, but that doesn't mean you're not running fast. That's for sure. Dave, same question to you. I mean, how do the needs from operations differ from those of IT and the sort of the necessary back-end systems?
Sure. I think being with this small business, and we grew we dealt with a kind of a rapid growth in our business. And so a lot of the challenges have to do with just scaling up. And we have this concept of a single source of truth. And that is just getting the correct information to the shop floor. And so an example in the past, maybe because we're such a small operation, we could stand to have just images in a Google document. But the moment that an upgrade comes in, someone has to manually update that document, and it becomes quite clunky or difficult to scale. So we're really leaning into opportunities to have that information straight from the engineering team go straight to NetSuite and to the shop floor. And so that kind of gives us a higher flexibility and rollout changes as our products change. And so I think there's always kind of a way from the ERP side of like data structures and how to make the data structure malleable and flexible with the different configurations that we offer. And then also giving the shop floor the information that they need to navigate those nuances of the product. And we're trying to liquidate this kind of concept of the tribal knowledge where maybe one person on the floor knows that solution, and trying to make sure that solution is documented, but also easy to retrieve and not, hidden away in some folder that's difficult to find at a later time.
Sure, sure. So you that's, I think, a great segue into the next big question, which is, how is this approach that you're taking with Tulip and this idea of uh, empowering the citizen developer? I mean, how does this approach differ from the way that you've done this previously? Dave, you gave us a little bit of a sneak preview, which is, you used to use Google Sheets, and you used to use you relied heavily on something called, this term I'm sure we're all familiar with, tribal knowledge. How does that differ from approaches you've taken in the past?
I think, well, in the past, I think we would say one person would spend the time to create that documentation for a product. And we also used a website called Dazuki, which we no longer use, but it was kind of it wasn't a bad platform, but we would populate Dazuki, but it didn't really handle all the different configurations, which were quite nuanced. And so that was, I think it was anytime the change came in, it took a lot of work to integrate that change. So not only are you changing a product, but you also have to put in the effort to change it. And that just kind of really makes it much more difficult to move forward and makes it a really uncomfortable process. And really the people who suffer are the people who are on the floor. And they're the ones who are navigating those kind of shortcomings or having to retrieve that information. And so I'd say kind of the big mission is getting the people the information that they need to succeed and to do things right. And so giving a sense of confidence in what you're fulfilling and not having to search for answers. And so that's kind of given our kind of rapid scaling up and getting new employees and ensuring that the new employees get that documentation that's kind of always on our mind in terms of what we're trying to create.
Sure, sure. Audra, how about you? I think same question here. How is the citizen developer approach different from the previous approaches you've tried in the past? And I mean, you've got, we didn't mention this in the introduction, but when we say you've got 21 years of experience, the majority of this was at GE. So very big companies, very big systems. How is Tulip different?
So my past life, I've spent a lot of time customizing MES systems to meet the needs of the factory floor. And it's always an ever-changing game, right? Especially when you're trying to do lean activities. And MES traditionally doesn't do things like andons very well, and things that are very, very common in lean practices. So the ability to have your manufacturing engineers, the people who are actually on the floor, your lean experts, being the people who are developing kind of the front end or the way that the app acts, and working with me to define the data that they want to collect, allows us to be more empowered to build what we need and be flexible to change and grow as our needs change. That alone, now I'm IT, right? And I'm accustomed to having huge development teams that write business requirements and develop, even in agile world, it still takes a long time to develop things. The great thing about Tulip and the partnership that we have with the citizen developers, who in my case are manufacturing engineers, we've kind of just educated a bunch of people, done some hackathons to get them comfortable. And it's created an ability to really take lean to the next level, kind of by doing digital lean. And that's been something that I haven't experienced in my career before.
It's really interesting. You're throwing a lot of crazy ideas out there, like digital lean and andon within the context of a system. I mean, I think what this is driving at in many ways is this idea of, really the work happens at the front line, and the systems we choose and where we go, it needs, we need to focus on Gemba. We need to be where the work is happening. We need to be focused on that frontline worker, and really everything we do is about empowering them. I was on site with a customer up in the Midwest, and I'm from the Midwest, and they were saying, they were describing it really, really well. And this is sort of in the early days of Tulip. And they were saying, like this associate here is he's the NASCAR driver, right? And when he like pulls over, his engineering manager, the supervisor, the IT director, the operations director, that's his pit crew, And if he needs gas in the tank, and he needs new tires, and he needs to get back on the road, right? And I really like that analogy, right? Because what it's really talking about is like everything we're doing is about augmenting this frontline worker and giving them the tools they need to work as productively and as safely and as efficiently as they can. And so, I mean, when we think about this idea of augmentation of that frontline worker, I think sometimes, I hear people talk about concerns about, well, I know how to do my job. I don't need Big Brother watching me, or there's some concerns around like, tools like this that are so flexible and can be deployed right to the front line, taking on almost like a paternal sort of Orwellian, look. I'm curious, Audra, have you ever? I mean, you're pushing these tools down to the front line. Do you ever hear that concern or that feedback?
I don't think of it as us pushing. It's more of them pulling, honestly. And our team members thus far haven't really had raised any concerns about Big Brother watching them, but that's not really the purpose that we're kind of after right now. It's really, how do we help them get help faster? How do we help them kind of gather data that we need operationally, that our operational leaders need, but do it in as touchless as possible way as we can through automation triggers and having all of the information come in, but minimizing the amount of touch that the operator actually has to do to get it. Tulip actually is very unique in the fact that it has some capabilities to do the IoT integrations that really our manufacturing engineers, because they already do PLC programming and things like that, it really is a quick enabler for them to kind of be able to collect that data without overburdening the operators.
Interesting. And Dave, I have a question I want to ask you, but before I do, I want to follow up. When we're talking about the IoT integration as a way of instrumenting and further augmenting that frontline operation, can you give some example? And you also brought up something important, which is you don't want to introduce, and this is all in keeping with lean, you don't want to introduce any non-value added work into the workflow, right? You don't want an operator looking at a screen, hitting buttons to say next, next, next. You don't want to do anything that doesn't contribute to their executing the work. And one of the ways that Tulip is unique, and Dave, you brought up another example of a system you used previously, but this is true across many sort of ostensible alternatives to Tulip. This idea of augmentation being more than just a digital experience that's constrained to a touch screen or a mobile phone, but rather have this extend into the PLCs, the existing infrastructure, to the sensors, to the devices, to the machines. And for those who may be new to Tulip, Tulip is an IoT-enabled no-code platform, which means we can very easily incorporate all of these data sources into the app experiences that we're using to help facilitate the work on the front line there. But Audrey, could you maybe follow up with a couple of examples around, how do you use the IoT enablement to capture the information you need without introducing non-value added work? Or I guess how are your citizen developers doing this is maybe a better question.
So there are things like proximity sensors on tooling. Like there are many different examples that we have across the ecosystem. We haven't gotten into the vision stuff yet, but that's something that I think everybody is really excited to get started with as well. We're moving at lightning pace at this point, so it's we're kind of grabbing the different features almost as fast as they come out and trying them, and then introducing use cases for them to understand where they are most usable. We do have like COVID stations that originally we worked with Tulip for the COVID kind of temperature scanning stations, and we introduced the ability for somebody to actually walk up and it kind of recognize that there's somebody there from a distance sensor, and then start the process of taking the temperature. So things like that are very common in our world with our manufacturing engineers.
I love that use case. You shared a video with us a couple of months ago. It's very cool what you guys are doing there. Really, really interesting. Now, Dave, wanted to follow up with you on the same question. We talked a little bit about I know in the early days, when you're talking about having this, you as a production manager, you have sort of two sets of responsibilities. One, you need to make sure all the transactions are happening in the ERP and everything's accounted for. Two, you need to make sure that you're running, that the operation is running as efficiently as it is able to run, and that you're getting the tools to the people who are doing the work. Right before we started the session today, we were trying to figure out where some very soothing jazz music was coming from, and this is like, it was coming from Dave's feed. He's there, broadcasting from the RBW studio today. But I mean, again, it's all about creating the right environment there, and helping folks, be their best. I know in the early days, prior to Tulip, when you're trying to capture this information about operations information about how the production was actually running, you're relying on tools like stopwatches and checklists and things like this to try and capture like target cycle time and figure out what the tack time should be for a one-piece flow operation. Can you share a little bit about how you used to do this and what it looks like today?
Sure. Yeah, it's it's kind of a very lowbrow, but where we started, especially when I was an operator, I used to have a stopwatch, and so if I was building a certain product type, I would start the timer and end the time, take a pen and write it down and say how long that was, and I would send an image to someone, and they would have to manually enter it in. And so I think Tulip really helped us transcend that interaction, where now when you scan the work order ticket, a timer starts at that point. Once I am done with the transaction, there's an input of that data at that time. So that really kind of resonated with me, the lack of data entry or opportunities of touches and trying to reduce the number of touches. And I like the idea of the technology kind of going with the flow or following the flow of the natural operations or natural behavior of the operators and capturing the data in that way, where I think it's easy to do data paralysis, where you're spending more time inputting data and you're not really even able to react to it, and it's actually slowing you down. So I think that was kind of our first pilot approach to Tulip, was kind of navigating no more stopwatches and capturing that. And we even had an inventory count recently, and I created an app to address that, where we used to have tickets and someone would write down with their hand, with the pen, write down this item, and at a later time someone would tear off that ticket and manually enter it in. And that was really just clunky and inefficient and took a lot of time and a lot of people resources. And so we were able to create an app where you would just scan the barcode of the label, and that data would be input into a CSV, which would go to the finance team to process at that time. So I think the agility of Tulip and the flexibility of it makes it really easy to integrate solutions. And then it makes it really easy to change things, or like a bad idea. Like, it's okay to have a bad idea, try it out, and then when that doesn't work out, we can easily edit it. And that, I think Tulip's really kind of awesome in that respect, that it enables that flexibility and enables that creativity on the shop floor.
Yeah, very interesting. I think you're bringing up some really good points here. You're bringing up basically like agility. You have a problem, you build a solution, you go after it. But then on the other hand, we have, Audra, responsible for a number of different facilities and many hundreds of associates on the front line. And I want to transition from, why are we doing this, and what's some of the impact we're seeing and the approaches we're taking. But like, I want to transition into like, how do you enable such agility without introducing complete chaos on the shop floor? What are the, and Audra, I guess this is probably a question for you. How do you give people the ability to do what Dave is describing as an IT person without descending into just complete entropy?
So what we normally do, so in order to get access to any production instance in my world, you have to go through Tulip University training. So we spent a lot of time at the outset really getting everybody trained, and then we did hackathons to educate. So for me, knowledge is power, and the more you know, the better you will be as a collective. So we spent a lot of time really kind of educating, and proliferation is going to happen. But again, it goes back to we know that there are certain components that are going to be really global, and we are focused on those in a different way. But we don't want to stop people from building what they need to solve problems on the factory floor that are immediate needs. Will they go into our analytics platforms and all of that stuff? Not initially, because if they're not part of the global plan, then they're back burner things for the IT group. But that doesn't mean we want to stop them from fixing things that the floor needs. Like, that's the whole point for me even existing as the director of digital manufacturing, is really to help solve problems with the ability of technology to augment, and it's just another tool in the toolkit to help solve things.
So you basically, you define, I just want to make sure I understand this correctly. You define the data structure that is going to be administered across the different facilities with global solutions. And across how many facilities are these live today?
Well, we currently we have 6 factories that have Tulip instances, and we actually also have some of our distribution centers. We have 2 distribution centers that have it, and more coming on board. So again, we're moving at a very fast pace.
It's not. You said you're early in your Tulip journey, and that's true, but it's not bad progress. When you think that this is less than a year, 6 facilities online, 2 distribution centers, more coming online, a whole army of citizen developers building on the front lines. So you define the data model that is centrally administered, and the applications that may be associated with this. These are pushed down to the various facilities. That data goes back into, and you have it. You could pipe it in, and for those who aren't aware, Tulip is an open architecture. So what we like to say is we love data. We love data. We like to take it. We like to give it away. Everyone should have free access to free data. So we capture a lot of this information in Tulip, some of which comes from manual interactions with these applications, some of which is coming from the various sensors or PLCs or devices that have been incorporated into these applications. That goes back to IT. You could then take this into like a BI platform. Microsoft is a great partner of Tulip, so you could push it through BI or something, or you could run the analytics in Tulip. For your purposes, probably makes the most sense to push this to a third-party analytics platform. But for the operations team, I would imagine that they probably do a lot of their analysis natively in Tulip. Is that what you see?
So I would say the way I think about it is the immediate displays, the data that you need to see immediately in time on the floor. Most of those are 100% in Tulip. The ones that are really tying it to other data in the ecosystem as part of the data fabric that we run our entire organization on, those are the data like dashboards for upper level leadership to see what's happening across the ecosystem. Those are the ones that I call them federated data sources at that point, because we really try to map them in correctly and ensure that they're able to tie out to the other data, like from the ERP and stuff.
Yeah, got it. And now, Dave, back to you. So you don't have to worry about. Well, I don't. This may not be true, actually. You tell me. I know. I know when we spoke there was well, you tell me. I don't want to steal your thunder, but you don't have to worry about quite that size of an operation. But when you talk about agility and how do you how do you train people? How do you get people ramped in Tulip? How do you are you the primary app builder within RBW and the enabler, or what does this look like in your context for all of the smaller mid-sized market
Sure.
folks out there?
I definitely feel like the citizen developer on our team, we're so very small. But I think what I essentially try to give opportunities for operators or certain personnel to implement smaller improvements. I think some of the more challenging aspects of Tulip for our operation here is connecting to our ERP, but if it stays within Tulip, it's actually quite straightforward and simple. And so it's very easy to have someone input product specific suggestions or operations, and they can integrate that into Tulip. And some people actually aren't even working directly with Tulip, but they're still facilitating and aiding in the process. So an example, our engineering team will update a drawing in Onshape, and because we have that connection, that goes directly to the shop floor. Whereas in the past, maybe it would go into a file and someone has to find a revision. So I think I kind of touched on agility, but also connectivity would be a concept I'd introduce as well. This kind of just connecting all these different software and platforms that we use and have them talk to each other. And in terms of tracking, an idea I wanted to express too was that there's kind of like a scale of time that we're tracking and how it's viewed. So, I'll suggest this idea of like minutes or seconds. That type of data is captured on Tulip, and that's conveyed to the shop floor, so they can get feedback for their activities. Whereas, in the past, when I was doing a stopwatch and entering that, it'd be difficult to feel the feedback for my behavior or activity. So, trying to get that information to them so they could change their behavior, they could see how they're going about, and perhaps something's really slow, and they can get that visual feedback on that. Whereas from our ERP level, maybe it's more minutes or at a higher level, and that gets tracked within our ERP. And we use another thing called Gecko Board to help visualize that. But I think just connecting all those different assets of our business, again, we're quite small, but that I think is kind of the most powerful aspect of it, and kind of helps us move forward in this new technology.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've got about 10 minutes left here. There's a couple of topics. I have a couple more questions that I want to ask you guys, but then we also have some questions from the audience that I want to make sure we get to here. So, Audra, you mentioned earlier in the discussion today, you mentioned this thing called a hackathon. And for those of us who come from early stage tech companies, hackathons are like a very normal, natural thing. For those of us who come from like big enterprise software systems, hackathons are like not a thing that we know. And if you come from Lean, you may be familiar with a different idea called a Kaizen event, which has quite a bit in common with a hackathon. In fact, the hackathons evolved from the Kaizen event. So could you just talk to us a little bit about what in the world is a hackathon and how do you use them?
So in our world, once a site gets a certain number of citizen developers trained and through the Tulip University, we engage for a hackathon really just to saturate the knowledge and to actually get the team together, because they learn generally individually, but there are usually complex problems that they would want to solve for their site, and having a hackathon allows them to come together and kind of what I always tell them is you're going to learn that somebody's really good at UI, somebody's really good at connectors, somebody's really good at the table designs. But in a hackathon, everybody kind of gets to wear the hat that they choose to wear, and they can change hats during the week if they like. But it really is for us, it's a hands-on immersion into the Tulip platform as soon as you have your training done, so that you can really get that true experience with a coach in the room. So much like a Kaizen event, and actually we work off of A3s usually in our hackathons. So we are very blended with Lean. I'm a Lean person, so I love the concepts. We do that. We write our user stories. We mock things up. We interact with the operators or team members, whoever the app is for, throughout the hackathon, and we really are doing that agile development, and then show, and then develop some more, and then show. So it's really iterative development, but bringing everybody together into a concentrated time that's all we focus on allows us to really do a burst of work, get something out, and get those skills really solidified. And that's really my goal, is to make them have that good solidification of skills, because then they'll be able to do it on their own in their own site. And that's our goal, is to enable them. Yeah.
Just awesome. Dave, what about you? Do you guys do hackathons, or how do you approach it? How do you approach this at RBW?
Yeah, I wouldn't say we do hackathons, but I think we'll integrate, like we'll roll out a new solution. And I think it's pretty awesome that I can just bring my laptop on the shop floor. And if someone says it would be really great if I had this information, I can easily retrieve that and kind of manually update the application as we're in real time on the floor. And I think that's a really awesome experience. And it's kind of unique that I've experienced with Tulip, at least, that the feedback loop between the operator's experience with the application can be quite small. And I think it can be really engaging and exciting for the operators because they could see their feedback and their improvements be kind of broadcasted quite quickly. And I would say like the Kaizen activity is pretty important to us. And I think you have a really great success when people want to intuitively take on Tulip. And I think back to that conversation of the big brother, and people's kind of fear to use that technology. And it's really great to see when people say, well, couldn't we just make an application for this? Or maybe we could try to automate that. And I think that's when it's really just exciting to be working at RBW, when you can really integrate that creative problem solving.
Yeah. Yeah. So with the few minutes that we have left here, we have a couple of questions, from the audience here. This one is from Anna, and she says that I've heard that some machine operators are concerned about divulging their expertise and becoming obsolete. Have you experienced this, and what was your solution? Is this something that you guys have experienced? I guess it's applicable to machine operators, also any skilled worker. Have you guys experienced this in either of RBW's or Terex's operations?
So I haven't heard this specifically, but we actually, depending on the factory, we already have work instructions out. So it's not, this isn't something that would be specific right now for us, because all of these assets kind of already exist. We are simply digitizing them and making them interactive, dynamic for the worker at the time of his build. So we haven't actually heard that concern, but we also, like I said, already had that documentation in place. So
yeah. And I Dave, do you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say our operation's quite small, but I can kind of emphasize with that, in that if someone's been working a role for a really long time, I can see where that fear may come from, where you've been doing this for a long time, and that I think that's kind of a topic in terms of embracing new technology or Manufacturing 4.0. And I think what I would hope to see is that operators feel more empowered with the technology and don't feel at risk. And I think really kind of see it as a tool to help them improve their productivity or help them improve their practice. And I think at that angle, it gets quite, is a much better experience. But I can see where that question kind of comes from.
Sure. Yeah. The way I've seen it typically play out is, there's a lot of times what people will do is put the target for the work cell for the day, up on the wall and say, this is where we're trying to go. Like, this is winning and this is losing, right? We want to win and we're a team, and here's how we win. And then the question becomes, how do I give, back to that analogy of the race of the NASCAR driver, like, how do I give you the tools you need to win and for your team to win? I think one of the things, Dave, you said was, we want to find tribal knowledge, and we want to address this with process, right? By getting the right information, not just from the heads of a particularly skilled associate or operator, but really get this into our standard procedure so everyone can do that. And by transitioning the mentality from, protect what is mine as an individual and accept inefficiencies of the system, really get into this kind of team mentality where we're saying, this is what we're trying to accomplish, and here's how we're going to get it done, and how do we, equip everyone to be as effective as possible. I think typically that's how I've seen this concern addressed across the customer base. So we're coming up on time here. I wanted to thank Dave and Audra for joining this conversation today, and thanks for everyone who listened in. I guess Dave or Audra, any final thoughts or parting words of wisdom from either of you two?
I like the NASCAR driver analogy. I think that's what I would respond to Anna even is, I think when you come with that angle, I think that's really exciting and empowering to the operator. And I think that in some way that's the audience, I feel like, are the people on the shop floor. And that really resonated with me. That's a pretty cool idea.
Audra, any closing thoughts? We've got about 15 seconds left here, so I'll let you close us out.
I would say I'm just excited about all of the new things that keep coming out. So it really does actually pair well to our continuous improvement journey. And so new technologies, capabilities actually help us continue to improve. And so I really love, because I love lean, so I love everything about what we're doing.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave. Thanks, Audra. And thanks, everyone who joined us for this conversation today. We'd love to hear from you. Reach out to us. You can find all the information you need at tulip.co. And I hope you enjoy the rest of the programming for the day. Thank you.